Greetings, everyone.
Hey.
I love how our intro is getting a bit more. Oh, what's his name? I forgot his name now. Who used to do the piano thing, Roger? Les Dawson gets a bit more Les Dawson every week, doesn't it? Do you remember that? You might not.
Yeah.
You might not know that that one, Nella. I don't know if you remember that, Benny, at all.
So,
Les Dawson's piano playing.
Welcome to all the apes, whether you're labelled or not. So.
Hello.
I feel like Ronnie Corbett, because we're going to say we've got a packed show tonight, and the first thing is, if I can get rid of this that item, is we're going to bring in Mel Broughton, and we're going to have a immediate update from the Beagle Camp, or Camp Vegan. So, Mel.
Hi, Mel.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's better this time. Yeah, how's it all going?
Good.
Give us an update, Mel.
Yeah, we've I suppose it's about, I do hear that, yeah, more support. Yeah, it's probably about 20-25 people here at the moment. The camp is really growing. I mean, if you look at each side of the MBR gates now down the road, 500 meters each way, there are tents and vehicles and banners. I mean, it's just incredible sight down here. It's just unbelievable. The workers left about half hour ago. The police turned up as they normally do. Only 4 of them. The workers departed the site, and the security guards have just changed over. But yeah, it's now been 25 days since any dogs left here, destined for a laboratory. So in terms of, success already, it's been a massive success, and it just seems to be growing even more. The support from the locals is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, there's been more local people down here tonight. The media are really getting onto it now. We've got ITV here tomorrow. We were featured in the Independent and the Telegraph at the weekend. There's just a massive growth of explosion of interest in what's happening here. And I think this is only going to get bigger. It's not going to stop, and the determination here is incredible. It's absolutely amazing. Everyone is absolutely determined that this place is going to go and the dogs are going to come out. We're all of one voice, everyone. So yeah, it's an amazing thing, and I think in terms of what it's doing for the movement in general, people are coming here who've never been to a protest before. People are coming here who had no idea what animal rights was about, and they're mixing with people who are, been involved like myself a long time, and they're learning. They're going to be the future. But I think in terms of what happens here at MBR, I haven't seen focus like this for a very long time. The determination is palpable. Everyone is absolutely determined and committed.
Take your shoes on the ground.
Let's just see if he comes back. Otherwise, well, that was quite a good report. Anyway, was it this story about they tried to sneak a beagle out in someone's car? Does anybody know about that? You'll know about that, won't you, Wendy?
Yeah. So they tried to sneak a beagle out, and I think that a beagle might have been taken out in someone's car, but they were saying that they were trying to take the beagle to the vets or something. Although they previously said that there's a vet on site 24/7 anyway. So there's a lot of lies coming out of the facility, and the activists are kind of having to make that choice between, do we let people out and let people in, but they have to let people in to kind of take care of the dogs and feed them and things like this, and let them out. Obviously, if that beagle did need veterinary care, they wouldn't want to block that. So they're having to make these decisions on the ground, really, and it's always difficult. But no van, or Mel's back. No vans of beagles have left, as far as I understand. Hi, Mel, you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Just died on me. Yeah. Hopefully you can still hear me okay.
Yep.
As I was saying, yeah, the way this is kind of developing is, I think it's something very, very special, and I think it's something that's going to have an impact on the whole animal rights movement as well, because there's something historic about this. Everyone talks about the kind of feeling there is here, and the absolute desire to achieve something here is so strong. So, and also that it's tapping into the wider public as well. I mean, obviously, millions of people in this country have dogs at home, so they can relate to this. But it's also now we're hearing increasingly from other sources that even in Parliament there are people now talking about what's happening here. And we know that the recent animal welfare bill that was the Animal Welfare Act that was put forward by Peter Egan is featured the footage that was obtained here at MBR. So the questions about what happens to animals because of what's happening here is reaching far and wide, and that's only going to. I think that's only going to. That's only going to grow as this continues. We have another demonstration coming up this Sunday, which is expecting a lot of people.
It sounds excellent. Because Mel, I know I messaged you this morning saying it was on Radio 4. They were talking about that whole thing, the bill that Peter Egan's trying to push for. Priti Patel, obviously, having those discussions with Lord Goldsmith, and it's really putting animal research and testing on the table politically, scientifically. It's being discussed as well. It's really brilliant, isn't it? It's just something like we've never imagined for a long time could happen. It's really heartening.
Yeah, what I find really exciting about it is all that is happening, but it's driven by the grassroots animal rights movement again. I find that incredibly exciting and empowering that once again, the campaigners on the ground have now pushed this agenda. And I think, for me, that's always been an important aspect of being involved in the animal rights movement, that we can create situations where things happen, where grassroots activists, by coming together like they have here, can create momentum that does bring change, and big things are going to happen. I have a real strong feeling that something really important is going to happen here, and everyone else has that same feeling, and everyone else is determined to achieve that. So, let's we just got to keep on doing what we're doing and keep that pressure on, and allow those people in other places to do what they've got to do as well. But I think, as I said before, what I find incredibly exciting about it, that it has been led by the grassroots animal rights movement again. And I think if anyone wants to see what the grassroots animal rights movement can achieve, then just come down here, because you can see it in action.
You're getting a lot of love in the comments, Mel, so that's good.
Yeah, lots of support, lots of well done, lots of keep up the good work. Everyone's very supportive. So, yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing stuff, man. It's really, no, it's really, really amazing to hear all this, and grassroots all the way.
I don't know if you can see this behind me. When another car's just turned up.
Oh, I just lost the sound there, Mel. We've still got your picture. We just lost your sound. They've turned up.
I don't know if you can see behind me. Another member of the public's just pulled up and dropped food and water off. This is happening. It just happens all day. The support is just incredible. Yeah, I'm just saying that there's a car just you can't see just behind me.
Yeah, we can see that.
Another member of the public's just pulled up delivering water and food. It just happens all day long here. The camp also has an official address, so Amazon and other companies are delivering parcels here. So the camp's actually recognised now. It's actually, parcels turn out with Camp Beagle on it as an actual address. So
brilliant. That's brilliant.
Amazing, yeah, really amazing. And it's just getting stronger.
Yeah.
Did you get any more support from the scientific community?
Oh, I think he's
bad timing.
Can you message maybe and just say thanks very much? That was a great So Actually, I remember we did a camp outside what was called Devil's Tower in Liverpool in the 1980s. In the 1980s, Wendy, and most of the locals were dropping beer off rather than food, but they were still dropping stuff off. But that was good. I think it was a lot more difficult then for supporters to actually be sure that they were dropping off vegan food. Whereas now, I imagine it would be a lot easier for people to just go into the supermarket, even if they're not vegan themselves, and say what's plant-based, because they're looking for the sign, I imagine. Right, so we better move on, because as I said, we've got a packed show today. So I'm going to bring in this chap. Now, Nella, this is a news story that's broken in the last, day or two, right?
Yes, on Saturday. This is a male monk seal named Kostis. He was 2 years old. He was found during a hurricane more than 2 years ago. He was separated from his mother. He was found by a fisherman, brought to the Hellenic Society for the Study and Protection of the Monachus seal. And then he was released on the National Marine Park, where he was protected under law. But unfortunately, he was found murdered on Saturday by a harpoon gun. We don't know who the person killed him is, if they're fisherfolk or not. That's the thing that most people believe. He was killed by a special harpoon gun with a spear with a larger diameter than the one used for fishing. So the killing was intentional. There is no doubt about it. And it's also a very serious criminal offense. So we are hoping that legal action will be taken, and probably they will found the murderer. And an interesting part of the story is that the non-vegan people refer to this killing as murder. I found the language very interesting. So Kostis was very friendly. He used to play with humans, swim with humans. He was climbing on little yachts and taken up. And probably when the murderer approached him, he thought that was a friend coming to play. So
because I think he was shot in the water, and they move really well in the water. So that would suggest that he didn't think that there was a threat, And in relation to what Deb says there, I could speak to that in the sense that one of the very early things that turned me on to veganism was watching a news item where the Orkney seal killers were saying that we've got to kill the seals because they're eating our fish. And I thought, what do you mean you're fishers? Yeah, and so it would be interesting if it was the fishing community that killed the seal, and also the fishing community that saved the seal originally. So that would be interesting in a way, I suppose.
That's the reason so many kills and dolphins and other sea animals are murdered every year, because fisherfolk believe that they are stealing their fish, and actually it's the other way around. So probably that was the reason. We don't know yet.
There's another theory for everybody to ponder.
Yes, that also.
Yeah, can't disagree with that at all.
And Benny, I wanted to ask you about the arguments were used when these became known. As you can imagine, there was an uproar from the vegan community, and many vegans posted or shared posts, including me. And these posts were using two lines of arguments. One goes, you are right to be sad about Costis, but he was not killed just by a harpoon gun. He was also killed by your fork when you eat fishes, because that's why so many sea mammals die every year. And the other one was, we actually don't understand why you are so sad about Costis, because all animals, including pigs and chickens and all the animals you eat, experience the same kind of pain and fear. So I want to ask you, what do you think about these arguments?
I think in cases like this, we had Cecil the lion, and even recently with Matilda the pig who escaped. People see the animals as individuals then. And I think rather than people have an emotional reaction because they're actually seeing an individual animal and they can obviously relate to that more than just sheer numbers of millions of animals being killed. So I don't think we really have to fight against them seeing that individuality and even against the emotion they feel and the anger and maybe the indignation about it, but try and almost maintain that same energy for all the other animals, which is not what happens. So I think vegan advocates will often say, you know, oh, you feel upset about this animal, we don't feel sorry for all the other animals. But I do agree, you've got to try and expand that kind of feeling to other animals.
What about the particular point, Benny, that the vegans are saying to the non-vegans, well, you killed the seal as much as the person with the gun because you support the fishing industry, and presumably, or the theory is that it was in defense of the fishing industry that the seal was killed. Now, I wonder, is that going to make the public think, or is that going to put their backs up?
I think initially it's going to put their backs up because they think I'm not directly involved. And obviously, if there was any criminal thing, it's going to be about someone being directly involved. But I still think it's a good point because in Scotland you have salmon farming and they kill a lot of seals every year. I think there was something recently about they're trying to cut down on that, but we just don't hear about that in the news. It's when we hear about individuals that it makes the news, really.
Benny, do you think, you know, you hear a lot from the vegan side of things, and I know that I used to definitely think and say this as well. I don't really so much anymore, but that you would say, when people say, oh, I'm an animal lover, when they're non-vegan, they say, oh, I'm an animal lover. We say, no, you can't love animals because you're not a vegan, and therefore, and you consume them and you wear them, etc. Do you think there's a logical fallacy in that argument? As in, you can't possibly love animals because you don't choose to avoid the exploitation of all of them. Is that a fallacy in itself?
Yeah, from the vegan side, I think it is, because I think it's kind of a loaded statement, really. We have to unpack it. What they mean is they like cats and dogs, one seal, you know, one elephant, and one lion that they've heard about in the news. They don't actually mean they love all animals. And the vegan claim isn't really about loving animals anyway. You know, it's more about justice for animals. You know, there's certain animals you might not like, but you still don't think they should be slaughtered or exploited. I think it's a compartmentalization, really. From the non-vegan, they are compartmentalizing different animals. We'd call that speciesism, but in their minds, really, they probably do love cats, they do love dogs, and they might even think they love some farmed animals.
Well, the big difference is that they don't have to have a problem about, well, this is a species that I'm myself exploiting. Although that's what the vegans were trying to say to them, to try and kind of move them towards that position. But I mean, Keith Thomas, the historian, would say that seals were among the privileged species. So, you know, horses, cats and dogs, seals perhaps, and so on. And they tend to be the ones that people don't, generally speaking, at least in Western culture, directly exploit, or at least not in the kind of way that they would cows and pigs, etc. So
I don't even think it's just species as well, Roger, because like I remember the other week I was standing by kind of water watching fishes swim around, and there was a family next to me, and there were young children as well, really admiring the fishes and saying how amazing they were, these enormous fishes, and they were just really admiring them and saying how wonderful. And then in the next breath they were saying, oh, when we get home for tea, would you like some salmon? And it's just like, my jaw was just dropping, and I was just thinking, how can you stand here and admire and really kind of appreciate these individuals and then talk about eating other fishes in the same breath? I think people can, and I imagine people could have a companion who was a pig and still eat bacon sandwiches. I think that people have that capacity to do that.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. And I think that when vegans show pictures of cute baby other animals, I think what the speciesists think is, well, yeah, I can join you with all the coos and the weak at the knee thing, but I can also eat them when they're a bit older, so I get the benefit twice. So I don't think there's a contradiction there, really. I don't think you say, well, you know, how could you coo over this other animal? It's just another form of exploitation in a way. You know, whilst they're babies, they kind of isn't that cute, isn't that cute, and then, you know, they're quite happy to go and, you know, because other animals change, especially now because of selective breeding, they change so quick. So a small cute piglet is going to be pretty massive 3 months down the road, and they're not going to look cute like, you know, I mean, I've been part of sanctuaries and rescues where there's a lot of people who just want puppies and kittens, and as soon as they start to lose their puppiness and kittenness, they want to replace them, you know, and so they want to go through a cycle of having these little cute ones, but they don't want adults, you know.
There's petting farms as well, isn't there? And they will have a farm shop, so people will be petting goats and piglets, and then exiting through the gift shop, you know.
Well, I don't know if Jennifer's still in the chat, but Jennifer tells a story of before she went vegan, she was at a zoo and was very sad, very, very upset about a rhino. I think a rhino who was in this very, very small enclosure, and kind of really kind of upset her. And so to comfort herself, she went and had a burger. And so that's exactly what you're saying there, Wendy, you know. So do you want to say our last thing about this then, Nella?
Hello.
No, I'm just going to say that this is a huge problem in the Mediterranean Sea in general, with many seals and dolphins killed every year. And the thing that blows my mind is that the non-vegan people deny the argument that this is what happens because fishing still exists because of the fishing industry. In some way, they manage to overlook this, or if they acknowledge this, they deny their personal responsibility, and they say, oh, there should be like stricter laws for the fishing folk, or fishing folk should be monitored more closely. Anything but accepting personal responsibility. So as long as there are people consuming other animals exist, individuals like Costis will have that kind of, and it was a very sad thing to watch the whole thing, the video from when he was found killed. It was graphic, and that why we didn't share. Just best in power, I would say, not just in pieces, best in power.
It's interesting about the language as well, actually saying murdered, because I remember Crufts a few years ago, I think there was an Irish setter was killed. He was actually poisoned, and a lot of the headlines said he was murdered. I'm not sure if it was a rival breeder or something that actually murdered him, poisoned him, and but every headline said murdered, and everyone on social media said murdered, so no one had any qualms about using language like that for that. But
Yeah.
if you say any farmed animals are murdered, you can't really say
That's
that.
interesting. Okay, so we'll move on from that sad story to a better one, perhaps, and then we will get to Benny. Don't fret, people. And so I just want to show you this. This is an update on Back into Daylight, the vegan-run animal sanctuary in Ireland. And Ronnie and myself, I think Ronnie's still in the chat, perhaps. Ronnie, myself, has agreed to do, I think, what's going to be the final Jailhouse Vegans, because we've already done a fundraiser for Back to Daylight, but they've just increased their residency from 400 to 600, and the reason for that is that last week they I think some farmer called round at 9:15 in the evening and basically said, if you can beat the slaughter truck tomorrow, you can have 200 out of 1,000. And so we had to adapt the VIP van and Declan's van for chickens, basically put cages inside them, and or make the entire thing into a big cage. So we did actually get there, and we did take 200. It was a bit of a bizarre day, but that's kind of what happened. Now this is a shed that we've been frantically trying to build. Now Declan is an incredibly good builder, and so he always builds things to last. And so this will last a lifetime. It's got a concrete base, got very kind of strong supports, galvanated. This is galvanated kind of iron, and he always does an incredibly good job. And in terms of the actual people who are being helped, let me just show you a couple of very short clips from that. So this was filmed by me yesterday, which was my last day at the sanctuary. And as I said to the team, I officially now hate horseflies, because we both got really, really badly bitten. So this is Declan feeding, 200, but now 185 hens. So the reason we've been frantically building this other shed, which is up the hill from here, as it were, you can kind of see it in the background, is because they're now in too little space. In fact, they've really kind of trashed the grass in a few days. They've really gone at it. So kind of Declan makes his way around the different feeders, and then eventually all the hens are spread out. So it's a great little video. What I wanted to do was point out how raucous everything is during this, dinner time, as it were. He does that thing. A line of chickens. Really
that's just lovely.
So essentially, within a couple of days, this population should be cut in half, which will give each and every bird twice as much space, and then we'll be able to have a bit of time to assess the situation, essentially. And then the last thing I wanted to do was just show you this little bit. Come back.
Deb says a chicken riot. It did look like that, didn't it?
Yeah. It probably was, really. Let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to do is show you the contrast. Now, this is when there's a sociologist friend of ours who's also a vegan called Jean, and he came up and did some work with us. And so after the work, we sat in the compound with them. Now, why won't this play? For some reason, it won't play. The technology let me down, folks. It says it's playing.
Hmm.
That's strange. Okay. Okay, let me reload that then, and if it doesn't work this time, we'll forget it. But basically what I was going to show you was the contrast between when it's very raucous, as Deb was saying, the riot. All right. Okay. I think we have to I've lost it, so I think we'll have to leave that. But effectively, what I was going to show you was that they were just kind of pecking around our feet. They had a fascination with my boots, and and they were just talking to us at that stage. Some of them were jumping on our knees and everything. And so, in that sense, it was really kind of interesting kind of experience. Anyway, so better late than never. Look at this. Looks like Benny, you're on. So. So the agenda really was that we invited you back really because we were kind of thinking, well, you know, we looked at the arguments in the book, and you were suggesting that they can be translated or operationalized, whatever you want to call it, into the street, as it were, in terms of activism. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be used as a handbook for advocacy. Any type of argument across, it provides a framework to put them in. And I think that's important because it's not just like a book of answers. If someone asks you this, this is the answer, like an FAQ, although those are handy for quick answers. I think it's providing tools, really, and a way of thinking about how to answer certain questions.
Right, so you kindly provided us with some more slides. So this is our second one. You wanted to start, I think, with the contents of the actual book, and just to do a bit of advertising for you. We're talking about this book. Okay, so, and you can again remind us about where people can get that. Afterwards, if you like. So, do you want to say anything about this, or should we move on to? Elsewhere?
There is a good question from Jeremy, the Ape, and I love the new name, Jeremy. At 6:33.
Yeah, Jeremy.
I want to be like you. Hoo.
What's the most challenging objection to animal use, and what's your response? Well, I think it's getting into the kind of chapter 6 territory with the reflexive arguments, as I've called them. So it would be you're accepting a lot of the kind of vegan premises, but people have a slightly different conclusion. So they might say veganism is more effective, or it's things where you're almost 99% in agreement, but they will have a slightly different solution in various areas where they think they might be doing less harm, shall we say. That's the way it's framed anyway. I still don't agree with those answers, of course, but I think they're the most, they get the closest. But in having to almost argue effectively against veganism, you're adopting so much of it that you might as well be vegan, or you would have to be, say, 99% plant-based anyway, if we're talking just about diet.
Could you give us an example, a specific example of that, Benny? Is there anything that springs to mind?
I think kind of, if people say, you know, it's a consumer activity, so they can avoid, say, supporting animal exploitation by being a freegan, which means like dumpster diving, that type of thing. You're not actually paying for any animal products, but I think you're still sending out a message that animals are kind of consumables, that type of thing. So the argument's a little bit weaker in terms of veganism in some of these grey areas, but you're having to adopt so many of the premises that I think it strengthens it overall.
I did mention last week, I think, and kind of stop me if I'm repeating myself. It's been a long week, but I did say that on TikTok, the farmers are really latching on to the harvest deaths, crop deaths type argument. But there's a subtle kind of rejoinder to it, which is that they're looking at the idea of practicable and possible, and they're almost like hinting that, well, isn't the vegan community big enough now to start even addressing that? So in other words, things like vertical farming and all the rest of the thing. In other words, take responsibility as a vegan community to come up with alternative production systems because of your own values. And I think there's probably going to be a time, and again, I might have said this last week, going to be a time when we can't ignore that, and there's going to be enough of us to do that. I mean, like, there's one Facebook group in Dublin. It's got 12,000 members. You know, if they gave €1 a month, then that would be enough probably to run a vertical farm, which wouldn't have crop deaths and wouldn't have the mileage, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think eventually we're going to have to, as it were, bite the bullet on that, and instead of just saying we're doing the best we can, actually kind of mean that a bit more proactively.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've covered harvest deaths in chapter 6, and I've made that available for free on my Medium. So just that chapter, because I do see that argument a lot. But my analysis of it is whether it's being used genuinely or just in a fallacious way. And also, like you say, with the vegan response to it, certainly shouldn't be dismissive, because I did find it a really troubling argument, and it is still troubling to think about all those deaths. And I think if we frame veganism as being cruelty-free or anything, we leave ourselves open to these kind of counter arguments as well. So I think we've got to frame it to begin with in the right way, that it's anti-exploitation. There might be harvest deaths and things that we can't exactly address at the moment until there are more vegan farmers who would care about those issues, and until there is a bigger vegan population. But then it's kind of calling the bluff of the people using the argument as well. Will they support us, or will those farmers switch to trying to reduce harvest deaths as well? I mean, in Germany, they do have a system with drones to try and find fawns in the long grass, because a lot of fawns do die through harvest. But if they can spot those from the air, they can try and move the fawns, because fawns will just lie down in the grass and they won't move, even if the harvesters come in, that type of thing.
Oh, that's interesting, because one of the vegan arguments is that other animals have got good hearing and they would get out of the way. But you're saying fawns, baby deers essentially, won't do that, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately,
What happens with their parents? Don't their parents try and move them, no?
In the cases I've seen where the farmers are saying, "Oh, these fawns have been killed," they haven't. You know, I think it is the response of depends on different species. So the fawn, the instinct is to just lay low to avoid predators, whereas mice will actually move and scurry away. And in the kind of Steve Davis arguments, a lot of mice did just migrate from the fields anyway. But he counted all those numbers in amongst the deaths that were killed by harvesters.
Would you recommend, I mean, obviously with the vegan community, we'd harvest a field differently and leave, you know, kind of lines of it for them, right? So they can, first of all, get into it. And then secondly, they'd still have a food source. I mean, I think a vegan community would be willing to pay for that and not think, well, there's a field, we've got to take 100% of it. We'd be more like thinking 75 or 70 or something, right?
Yeah, I think, and I don't think, because of the massive reduction in land use, which, you know, some figures put at 75% less land for a vegan model. So it doesn't mean it has to be intensive. If we reduced it by 50%, that'd be a lot less intensive You could have areas that are rewilded, wildlife corridors so that they can actually escape. I mean, in terms of roads as well, road collisions with animals, we want to provide more wildlife bridges, more safety features. You know, thinking about a vegan world is thinking about accommodating wildlife as well.
I'll tell you one thing that I appreciate about your approach, Benny. I think it's very close to Tom Reagan, in the sense that Reagan sometimes said, well, he often said actually, well, that's a difficult question, because there are some difficult questions. And he also said that, you know, we vegans don't necessarily have all the answers, and that you need people of goodwill to come together to solve this. And I think that's a very refreshing approach, because I think some of the influencers think they've got to have a kind of knee-jerk answer to every single point. And of course, some things are very difficult, you know, and quite, you know, philosophically and practically complex, right? And I don't think that we should shy away from saying that. Well, that's a difficult question.
Right,
Yeah, no, definitely.
It's the last. But I think, yeah, with Reagan, he says with the line drawing, that type of thing, no one knows for certain, but, you know, we can cautiously say this area we know more confidently. And I think that is the scientific approach as well. It's where you can be, you know, a certain percentage sure of things.
Speaking of which, so I think this is the one you wanted second, Benny. So what do you want to say about this one?
Yeah, I've only just recently seen this one myself. My friend Trey on Facebook tagged me in this, and because I've included Graham's hierarchy in the book, which was the hierarchy of disagreements that we talked about in the first show, this one's science denial, but I think this has implications for kind of vegan outreach and picking your battles. So at the bottom are the people that you're more likely to reach. Everyone on this list is wrong, but they're wrong in a different way and they're using different arguments. So ad hominem at the top, if they're just insulting you or they won't accept you as a person saying what you're saying, then it's very hard to reach them or persuade them. Obviously, intimidations can be an argument from force, or even an argument from majority. And then we have authority there and false authority, which is fallacy as well. But usually the fallacy of appeal to authority actually means a false authority, because, say, if someone is a doctor, you can't just say, oh, I don't trust them, or I do trust them because they're a doctor. You trust them because they are supposedly trained and qualified. I think the argument from ignorance and silence.
Argument, right? Sorry, Benny, carry on.
What was that?
No, just this is a movement argument, because the ones who are less likely are going to be moving upwards, and the ones that are more open to arguments will be moving downwards. And so the less likely ones will get worse and worse and worse when you're talking to them. That's what this is saying, isn't it?
Yeah, the chance of reaching them or them changing their minds is worse as it goes up. I think it might be the same person could become more closed off, or it could just be different groups of people. So in scientific terms, if someone's kind of adhering to a scientific method, but they're trying to use a study, or if you can show them that study is flawed, at least you're kind of playing the same game. And if they will accept, oh, okay, that study was poorly conceived, had a bad or flawed methodology, then they can possibly see that, and then they can change their mind. I think as you go up, they're less likely to change their mind. So with the middle ground, circular reasoning, I think that's a kind of appeal to balance fallacy that we see a lot of times. I think we were talking a little bit about that last week with vegetarians, where they think they occupy the middle ground, whereas really we're talking about speciesism and anti-speciesism. So it is a binary, really, whereas some people will think they're in the middle, but you're not really.
Actually, you give a really good example of that in the book, Benny, and again bringing up Tom Regan, because you say that the whole concept of that balance and the binary and being in the middle is false, because and that you see it on TV shows as well, like when you used to get on the Good Morning Britain or whatever, and they'd always have, like, if they were bringing a vegan on, they'd always bring someone from the industry or a hunter as almost like the polar opposites, as if to say probably the right answer is somewhere in the middle. And that's the fallacy, isn't it, that the balance isn't necessarily in the middle. And Tom Regan, you give the example of Tom Regan saying that, yes, I'm an extremist because I'm against rape all the time, I'm against murder all the time, I'm against exploitation all the time. So the right answer doesn't necessarily lie in the middle. And I really like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think when we frame it as an issue of justice, it's easier to see that it's not a matter of degrees, I mean, I tend to define veganism as a position, so it's a principle that you adopt. So, all this vegan before 6 type of stuff and reducitarianism throughout the day or anything. Don't wake up and think, oh, I'm a vegan, and then by the evening you're not. It's a principle that you're following and adhering to in your life.
This
I was just going to say,
this is an interesting one. I think, was this one you're going to point out, Wendy? I think, but
yeah, that's exactly this.
Yeah, because I see this. I agree with Jeremy here, or at least, I kind of support the question in the sense that you see a lot of people. Oh, well, that's a so-and-so fallacy and all that. And I think if you've got all those in your head, I'm not sure if it comes over that well. It's almost like a ha-ha. I know this one. It's that. It kind of comes over as a bit kind of snotty, if that's the right way of putting it. I think that's maybe what the ape is getting at here. So what do you think of this?
The ape.
Yeah, I don't think it's always useful. I don't think it's always useful. You've got to really judge the conversation and the kind of context of it. I think people, have started calling people debate bros when you're just always saying that's a fallacy and, talking about logic all the time. But I think it's useful to know it yourself, but whether it's good to bring up in a conversation or not is a different question. I've kind of veered away from it myself now. I mean, I used to be in a lot of debate groups on Facebook and that type of thing, and I was always just saying, that's a fallacy, that's an appeal to nature. And it really depends on the person, because there is the fallacy as well, where you're kind of pointing out arguments.
Is there a fallacy?
Oh,
fallacy. Our brains are in sync tonight, Roger. That's just exactly what I was thinking. It reminds me of when you're teaching as well, is that concept of having the iceberg, that the knowledge that you need is everything that's under the water, which is the huge part of the iceberg, and the little tip above the surface is what you share. But you need all that information underneath, but you don't need to tell everyone everything you know. You just have to give them the relevant points and, sort of be discerning in the information you share.
You could identify the fallacy.
Yeah, this is a fallacy that I've not moved on. So this is well, I won't say what I said before we came on screen. What do you want to say about this, Benny?
This was an example of the type of stuff I post on my Facebook or on Instagram and Twitter. So I tried to come up with, pithy sayings. I kind of had reducitarians in mind for this one. Brian Cateman would be one of the main ones, because they will try and give vegan advocates advice on what's the best way to get to a vegan world and this type of thing, when they're not even advocating for veganism. Now, when I read Robert Grillo's book, which is really good, he follows a truth-based advocacy. He calls it or truth-centered, and that's what I try to stick to myself. because I think in that you're really respecting the person you're talking to. You're not thinking, I'm going to lie to you, or I know better, but I'm just going to tell you this bit. And I suppose it does kind of come to what you were saying, Wendy, about that kind of, you know, almost it's a curse of knowledge. When you're vegan, we know a lot of things we could say, but we just need to give the vital information. And we kind of, the curse of knowledge is forgetting what it's like to be a non-vegan sometimes. So you need to just give the relevant information and try and put yourself in the shoes of the non-vegan up to a certain extent. But thanks for the advice on advocating for veganism. A person who hasn't even convinced themselves to go vegan. It's definitely directed at Caitlin, because I think he's been a reducitarian for 8 years. And if it supposedly leads to veganism, then he certainly isn't following his own advice. And I talk about a bit about that as well.
This would work with activism, wouldn't it, Benny? This would work with activism, because some people go, you're doing your activism wrong, you know, the non-activists, as it were. So there is a kind of activist version of this, I think.
Yeah, the best example I saw of that, and I included it in the book, was someone had commented on Vegan Sidekick, when you'd always get people saying, this isn't the right way to advocate. You know, you're going to put people off, you're too aggressive, this type of thing. So the way to turn it around was, okay, you tell me your argument for being vegan, write it out, and then read it back to yourself, and then that'll convince you to go vegan, won't it? You know, it's kind of calling their bluff, because if they can't convince themselves to go vegan, I don't know how they're claiming to be able to convince other people.
I think Brian's staging a coup to take my place on the panel. He's he's really ousting me.
It's kind of, are we there yet? Have you finished yet? Yeah.
I know. Surely you've done now.
This was another one about kind of resource use. And I mean, going back to like the debate groups I used to be in, we had vegan and non-vegan discussions on Facebook, and we tried to get rid of all the trolls in that group. But now and again, you would get a good point raised by the non-vegans, and I wasn't really aware too much of some aspects of resource use. So they would say, "Oh, what's the vegans' plans for this and that?" So I ended up having to research it quite a bit myself. So one of the things was phosphorus, because we mine quite a lot of rock phosphorus, and scientists are kind of divided on whether we're reaching peak phosphorus at the moment, almost like we're reaching peak oil. And, you know, they're worried about the supplies are going to run out for that, because it's basically, that's like using artificial fertilizer on the fields. But I think if you keep in mind the kind of general principle that veganism will be less resource intensive because of feed conversion ratios and using less land. So any arguments for resources or harvest steps, you can kind of, a ballpark figure, you could divide them, impact of veganism by 10, say because of trophic levels. And it's the same for phosphorus. You're going to be using a lot less phosphorus in a vegan diet. So the heavy phosphorus footprint of meat is a good reason to eat less of it, given that phosphorus is a finite resource that might become scarce one day.
Yeah, there's a few reasons for people to give up, eating less of it, whatever it is. You said, what are your vegan plans, or what are the vegans' plans for this? I used to really resent those questions, because quite often people would come up and talk about a problem that they'd created and ask us for the solution. And that used to really piss me off, because they kind of like, well, what's going to happen if, or, and all this kind of stuff. And you go, well, look, what are you going to do with all the other animals if we don't eat them? And you say, well, you bred them. We didn't breed them. It's nothing to do with us in a sense, right? And so I always used to be quite resentful for people to come up and kind of, well, you vegans, what is your solution to this problem that you had nothing to do with?
Yeah, and I think that goes to what you were saying about Tom Reagan, sometimes saying, I'm not sure of the answer, but then no one is really. I mean, at least we're trying to look for some solutions at the moment. I mean, I remember one person was saying, you know, if there's more wild animals, there could be more collisions with deer, say, in the United States on the roads. So, but you've got to look at what's the solution at the moment. There really isn't one unless it means, you know, everyone getting together and creating more wildlife crossings.
Ronnie's got a solution for that. He says that we should make the speed limit about 20 miles an hour for everything. So
Yeah.
you can imagine that a high-speed railway goes down to 20 miles an hour. I'm not quite sure whether people are going to buy that, but it would be an interesting one, that one. This one, I've got something to say about this, but do you want to start off with this, Benny?
Yeah, so just another example of a kind of humorous one. This was written maybe a year and a half ago, or maybe a year ago. Meat alternatives are getting so realistic that they will soon be able to cause zoonotic pandemics and antibiotic resistance.
Now, I know a few people would say most people won't get that. It's too kind of sophisticated, you know.
So it's kind of turning things on their head, really. You know, if we want, you know, people say, "Oh, do we want the alternatives to get so realistic that they have the same mouthfeel, the exact same taste?" So it's just a humorous way of saying, "Oh, we might be able to cause a pandemic soon," you know.
Just causes many problems as the thing.
Yeah.
Now, my question was the language here, because there is a recent speech by Ronnie, and I see Ronnie's in the chat, and Ronnie was talking about, I think the phrase that you used, Ronnie, was fake meat, I think you used. And so meat alternatives, fake meat, faux meat. I'm much more in favor of Colleen Patrick Gaudreau's idea of claiming that vegans eat meat. It's just that it's vegan meat or plant-based meat. And I think because, I mean, the reason that it came up because Jennifer and I were taking a film of some Irish adverts that were all bunched together in a particular place. And they've started to say things like, you know, our food is real food. And they were obviously having a go at the meat alternatives without really saying that, but that's obviously what they're doing, because everyone that's got real food on it was a flesh product, right? And so I was just thinking that I'm not quite sure that if we use words like, you know, fake, alternatives, faux, that we're not helping that situation of, well, you know, people say, oh yeah, well, forget about your meat version because your vegan version, because I want the real thing. And I think we're making a mistake there, maybe.
I have a comment on that before Benny answers, so he can take that under consideration too. I agree that this is doable in English because meat, at least if I'm not wrong, used to mean any kind of solid food in Old English. So you can say vegan meat. In other languages, though, meat just means parts of dead animal. How one could do that?
But has it always meant that? I mean, Gaudreau would say that it was kind of almost like adopted and claimed by the flesh industry. But I mean, there's biblical references to meat meaning good food. But I think her argument was in most cultures, the original meaning of the phrase was not flesh. But I don't know for sure.
I think maybe, was it solid food it meant? It might be kind of an Anglo-Saxon thing. That's why it hasn't translated into other languages, maybe. But yeah, I think I would probably modify the language if I was writing it today. I'd have to think of something else witty, you know. But I do. I agree with Colleen. Kind of the way we frame it we can just fall into traps if we don't start off with a good framing, and that includes our language.
Well, as the ape is reminding us, our language is very, very important. You know, we are claims makers after all, which is the main thing about us. Be interesting to see what people in the chat think of that and whether they use. I mean, I do know quite a few people who say vegan meat, and even sort of like vegan cheese, you know, that kind of stuff. Whereas they don't shy away from using those kind of words. But I definitely think that if you say fake yourself, it's kind of almost lining you up for a fall, really. Speaking of flesh, this one.
Okay, yeah, just more information on showing the reduction possible with vegan model if everyone's following it. Greenhouse.
I just realised I was muted. I was chatting away to you, Benny. Then I was muted. I was thinking, why is he not answering my question? So, no, I was just going to say just the flesh thing, because I was just saying the flesh. Even flesh doesn't necessarily mean the body of a dead other animal, because you can say flesh like the flesh of a mango, for example, the flesh of fruit. Yeah. So even flesh and meat not necessarily always.
And coconut milk as well, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the greenhouse gas footprint average diet, the SAD diet. I love the fact that it's called the SAD diet, which is pretty good, isn't it? And then you've got the plant-based diet at the bottom, which vegans have. A vegan's diet, plant-based.
Yeah, so at the top really is the current average diet, which is totally unsustainable if everyone's following. I mean, there's a lot of talk. What I found recently is one of the main arguments now is kind of individual versus systemic. But if you want to look at what everyone would have to do individually, then this is it really. Because if this diet spreads out from America and everyone tries to follow it, it's just not possible.
Come on, panel. What's the phrase in this, especially the right hand side, that's going to niggle you? What's the phrase?
Reduced diet. 2/3 vegan.
Two-thirds pregnant. Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you know, because obviously it means diet. You see, this feeds into this thing that from every kind of angle that you look at, there's a lot of pressure for veganism to reduce to a diet. Whereas, you know, if you think, well, I support that philosophy. I mean, can you support a philosophy by 2/3? You know, so it's an interesting one, that one, isn't it? And we fall into the trap a little bit, you know, like vegetarians. I mean, it's interesting. This thing, vegetarians are quite a long way from vegans in this one. Whereas, you know, it's always traditional to say, well, just one more step, one more push, and you're there, kind of thing. And we've stopped doing that now, which is good. The only problem with that is interesting. In the movement now, there's a lot of vegans making kind of all-out attacks on vegetarianism. And so that bit from the pioneers' point of view is not a problem. Attack vegetarianism, but don't attack vegetarians. And I see a lot of attacks on vegetarians now, which I don't think is a good strategy particularly. Because I think they can be just as socialized, therefore just as ignorant as anybody else. I mean, they say it all the time, don't they? I didn't know. And we always go, how could you not know? But that's what they say over and over, don't they?
Yeah, and there are a lot of vegans who used to be vegetarian as well, myself included.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a bit of frustration from the vegan side. You know, we're thinking, oh, it should be easier to talk to vegetarians if we just show them the egg and dairy industries and what goes on. But we do come up against a lot of resistance.
Here's Jeremy trying to pull all our chains, and here's Jeremy the ape trying to pull my chain even more. So yeah, thanks for that. Get back into your tree. That's what I say.
Benny, I wonder with the book. So with these arguments, because what I was really interested in, and your opinion on, is how you would sort of use your book in a way that you would maybe advise or guide people to maybe structure their arguments? Or how could we use your book as a tool in that way to help structure some of these arguments?
So I think it's kind of categorizing the arguments, really. So you come across an argument and you're able to put it into this framework and then see what a possible answer could be. Because rather than just having a list of, oh, here's the question for a vegan and here's the answer, I think it's more of putting it into kind of a family tree of arguments in a way, and then seeing how they're all related, and then seeing what you would need, how you would need to answer it. So, for example, what kind of claim is the non-vegan making? Are they making a factual claim, in which case we're providing counterfacts or the actual facts? Are they making a scientific claim, where then we have to find the actual science behind it with this type of chart and like the R world in data type of information we were talking about last week? Are they making a philosophical claim? So where we have to get into ethics, and is that the discussion they want? And then in terms of identifying fallacies, I think, like Jeremy was saying, do you really want to state it explicitly or just have it in mind? So I'd be more towards having it in mind that, oh, they're appealing to nature, but how can you rephrase it to them in a way that they realise that's what they're doing without coming across as this kind of logic bro type of thing? So if they're appealing to nature, or let's say it was a lion's though argument, which is an appeal to animals eat other animals, so it's okay for humans to eat animals too, which we always abbreviate to lions though, as a shorthand. So we'd say the fallacy there actually is cherry picking, but that might not be that obvious at first. But the way to see that it's cherry picking is you could ask them a question of kind of, are there any other behaviours that lions do that you think we shouldn't try to emulate as well? And then that's also the kind of Socratic method where you're getting them to answer it for themselves. And I think they can kind of realise then, well, yes, there are behaviours that lions do that we wouldn't want to emulate. And then the cherry picking becomes obvious because they are just picking one behaviour, which is eating animals, and trying to use lions as a justification for humans doing that. So there are other answers to that question, but if you're going to try to identify the fallacy, that's one way of doing it.
I like the question, the Socratic method, the questioning, and actually getting them to say themselves exactly why their argument doesn't stack. Because then they'll think, okay, they're going to say it through their own words rather than you telling them and then having a block or a barrier there. That's quite a good way. Yeah. So you don't recommend having just like cards that you bring up. Oh, this is a cherry picking fallacy. This is an appeal to nature. Right. You could just pull them up. Just have it ready. Little cue card.
Even the Socratic method should be used sparingly, obviously, because it can probably get you killed as well. Like
the Socratic fallacy. So a couple of issues here. I'm highlighting the vegetarian here, and you can see that the dairy part is probably twice as much as the SAD diet. And so it's interesting because I've always argued that a dairy light meat eater is probably, if suffering is the criteria, which it often is for people, a dairy light meat eater is probably causing less animal suffering than a dairy heavy vegetarian. So there's that point. But also, I think a lot of vegetarians now are kind of on the soya milk or on the plant milks as well. So I'm not quite sure whether your average vegetarian would be eating that much or consuming that much dairy anymore. It's interesting, that one, for me, because you tend to think that because of the prevalence of plant milks, that's one thing that a lot of vegetarians might have moved into, even though they remain vegetarian.
I know a lot of non-vegans now that have swapped out for plant milks, but they haven't gone vegan, but they have just done the plant milks because they prefer them now, and they are aware, kind of in the back of the mind is the dairy issue. And I think with that vegetarian there, if they like you say, if that no dairy meat eater was cutting out, they're cutting out dairy, but if they were cutting out fishes there, they would actually be less than the vegetarian there. And maybe the eggs as well would be almost be equal. If it was a no dairy, no eggs, almost equal there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that one.
Is it important though? I mean, obviously, vegetarian causes harm, but in a world where personal consumption has no impact in the sense that there are the subsidies and the bailouts and the dairy produce and even the animals bred are more than the world consumptions require. Even being a vegan doesn't spare any lives, but I think the power of being vegan is on the statement itself, not on the lack of consumption.
Yeah, I agree with the dairy bailouts and all that type of thing in America. And if the business was actually allowed to compete on a fair level playing field without the subsidies, and if they had to kind of accommodate all the externalized costs. So I think still that's why we need to push for the systemic change to try and get those subsidies shifted. But I think that does require a population of vegans to push for these things, in using strong arguments. Right?
Is this an argument you hear from the other side, that since personal consumption has no impact, why should I change my ways and stop consuming animals?
Yeah, get that a lot on Twitter at the moment with the no ethical consumption under capitalism type of arguments. But I agree with you that it's kind of veganism is more than just the consumer boycotts. It's that modeling of the world we want. It's proven that we can live this way as far as we can, and we're the ones that are going to be pushing for that change in terms of systems, and we're the ones in place to offer these arguments as well.
Interesting debate here about maca. This is McCartney, and Bernie V was saying, "Are you sure he's not vegan now?" There's a Google series where these celebrities had this kind of board, and they were ripping off their most asked question that was Googled in, and one of them was to McCartney, "Are you a vegan?" And he said no, he's a vegetarian. That was about, I don't know, a year ago. So if there has been a change, it's been pretty recent, considering the fact that he's been a spokesperson for all the animals for so many years, kind of thing. But because at one point, I think Stella McCartney might be vegan, and he did say at one point
she's vegan. She's vegan.
Yeah, and he did say I should be, and Stella keeps telling me that I should be, but I'm not. He once said, yeah.
Also think that the Linda McCartney product series are not all vegan.
No.
There are some that are vegetarian.
I think there's a new cookbook out from the McCartneys, and I think it's all vegan.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm not sure, it might be out in a week or two, actually.
Oh, well, things are looking up if all the McCartney things go vegan, isn't it? So
yeah.
So what's this one?
If you are identifying any problematic variables with vegans or veganism, but still know it's possible to be vegan and avoid those problem areas, then you are merely weaponizing those issues against other animals to perpetuate speciesism and animal exploitation.
Is this a vegan was rude to me type thing, is it?
Yeah, it's a response one to a lot of what I was seeing on Twitter at the time. So we get a lot of arguments about, I've identified this thing that's wrong with veganism or a particular individual vegan. So I tried to cover quite a lot of different variables to show that variables is where a lot of fallacies come from. So, but if you can identify what the thing is wrong with a certain type of advocacy, and you know you can avoid that in your own advocacy, then that's what you should be doing. And similarly, if it's someone else's behaviour, a certain vegan's behaviour, but you can avoid it. I mean, that's what we all do anyway. If we see that there's a problematic vegan, we're still vegan despite them, and we're all still vegan in spite of these arguments about, certain forms of veganism being problematic. I mean,
problematic vegan, Wendy and Nella? We don't know any of those, do we now? No.
No. I don't know what you're talking about, Benny. Really?
No such thing, Benny. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I call. I've got another term for them as well. Troublesome vegans in the book is the kind of ones that they're the ones that pop their heads up. When you're advocating veganism, and they will say, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing it like this," and leave those people alone, and they'll kind of really try and water down your arguments and try and silence you in a way. So I find if you just ask them why they're vegan, it's never really a good argument. They'll often turn out to just be plant-based for their health. So, and they won't be able to provide you a good animal rights argument, certainly not a strong argument for being vegan. It's just really interesting to find out what their case for veganism is. I remember I was getting hassled by Mr. and Mrs. Vegan on Twitter. So I asked them, why are you vegan? And they were just, just for personal health reasons. They were saying honey is vegan, loads of different things are vegan. So I just asked them, why are you vegan then? Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Vegan.
Yeah.
Is that what they call themselves?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't that vegan couple, was it? Right, I think this one may be the last because we're on 17 minutes over in a way. But so this is Carl Sagan, right?
Yes, big influence on me in terms of critical thinking. I don't know if any of you have seen Cosmos, the original series. That was really good. So I think
that's a long time ago now, isn't it? Long time
yeah,
ago.
I got the DVDs for that, and then they did put it up on Netflix, I think. And then Neil deGrasse Tyson, who comes in for a bit of flack in my book, he took over the series. He's kind of positioned as the successor to Sagan, but I think he's very disappointing in a lot of ways. I mean, even he tries to say he destroys a lot of people in arguments, but then gets destroyed by Earthling Ed himself, because he tried to do plants though recently. That was more recent than the argument I included in my book, where he was kind of mocking animals and saying, well, we breed them, so we can do what we want. And he was completely wrong about the various greenhouse gas emissions, the contribution of transport versus the contribution of what you're actually eating. He didn't seem to be aware of the studies where it's more important what you eat than where it comes from. So this statement from Sagan is from one of his books. I think it may have been co-authored a bit by Andriane, who was his wife. Sagan's sadly now dead. I like to think he'd be vegan now, though. So he said,
I think Matt Beckhoff might challenge this now, saying that most people now wouldn't say that. I mean, you do get some people saying it to kind of wind you up, but I think most people now wouldn't say this anymore, would they? I mean, how many people get people saying that now? I mean, I don't think anymore.
Yeah, I think looking back at old articles, there was definitely more denialism and kind of the behaviorism. There was still a lot of that about, but I think most people do accept animal sentience now, and then there are very few Cartesian type of people around. So I think he might have wrote this in the 90s, when maybe he did have to push back against it a bit more. And he's one of them people that I like to think would be vegan now, because he did seem more open to the type of arguments. He says humans who enslave, castrate, experiment on, and fillet other animals have had an understandable penchant for pretending other animals do not feel pain. It is unseemly of us who often behave so unfeelingly towards other animals to contend that only humans can suffer. the behaviour of animals renders such pretensions specious. They're just too much like us. So it's interesting he actually says other animals as well, because that's something, rather than saying animals now, I tend to say other animals. Because I think that's the best kind of language I've landed on anyway, rather than just saying animals, to emphasise the fact that we are animals too.
Yeah, definitely, me too. Say that, or our fellow animals, or some other such phrase.
I think
Yeah.
Jeremy is latching onto the end bit probably for this bit. A lot of animal welfare, well, a lot of animal welfare in that claim. So your welfare's really, Benny, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Or maybe he'd be a welfarist now if he was alive.
Right. So is there any more? Oh no, that was the last one. Okay, I thought it was. Right.
I have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
No, it's okay. You go.
A general question. I don't remember in which chapter you use a quote by Voltaire, if I'm not wrong. It says, if you want to converse with me, define your terms. So what's the advice you would give advocates regarding language?
So I think,
and the fact that sometimes we use the same words, but vegans mean one thing and non-vegans mean another thing. So
yeah, I would actually just point that out. It tends to be people saying veganism is a diet, and they've really reduced it down in terms of what veganism is. I would say I would actually define it. You know, this is what I mean when I'm saying veganism, and then see if they agree with that. And then you do get a lot of people kind of appealing to definition. They'll bring up a dictionary definition where it actually says veganism is a diet, and then they're trying to use that. But I think we just have to say, well, even if it says that, this is what I mean by it, and then discuss it on those terms. So I mean it as anti-exploitation and a position against the commodity status of animals is something I say quite often now.
Dave asked a question, Benny, did Richard Dawkins say that there is no moral justification for eating meat, yet he still eats it? Because I think you mentioned Richard Dawkins in the book, don't you?
Yeah, he's one of the ones that we were saying about slowful induction, and we weren't sure if that was a speciesist term itself.
That's right.
But it's where you're slow to put the pieces together of an argument. But I think the likes of Sam Harris, Dawkins, deGrasse Tyson, when they actually know the arguments, and obviously Dawkins has had conversations with Singer about speciesism, and he says he agrees with it. But they just kind
He's a slippery fellow. He's moving towards veganism like this.
yeah.
Slippery fellow. I like that, Deb.
Yeah, I haven't heard slippery fellow for a long time. That's actually out of Jane Austen.
Yeah. He's
I
a
say you're a
slippery
slippery
rascal.
fellow, aren't you?
He's a slippery rascal. He's a cad. I've just got a question about all this as well. I'm just kind of thinking about maybe ecofeminism and vegan feminists, and that kind of critique of animal rights being too much in the sorry, it's really hard to concentrate when I've got Brian's bum in my face. Sorry, everyone. I will formulate a thought in a minute.
I can't see why.
You know, just that kind of critique of over reliance on reason and logic, as opposed to Roger says you've got a little pencil sharpener bottom, as you know, as opposed to, you know, having that kind of harmony with emotion as well. And I just wonder, does this focus on debating and building arguments, does that kind of feed into that a little bit, in terms of we're just relying solely on logic and reason? Like you just said, someone like Richard Dawkins, or as Dave mentioned in the comments, might know all the reason and the arguments, but they still don't go vegan. because there's a disconnect, there's an emotional disconnect perhaps. And I just wonder how, and if you've thought about that, Benny, at all, in like, how do we, bring in some emotion and actually appeal to people's emotional responses as well? Because as we've discussed before, they are actually important to people making a change in their cognitive, thinking and their behaviours as well.
Yeah, I think the logical arguments are necessary, but maybe not sufficient to for the whole thing. Because you can know the arguments, but there's just not any impetus, and you've still got that side of not caring. In terms of emotion, if someone's trying to put it back on us by being logical, they will say, well, that's just an appeal to emotion. But I think without any emotion at all, that itself isn't logical, because we do have a visceral reaction to when we, and a common sense reaction to when we see animals being hurt. And I think that's that's actually really valid. I think we can try and incorporate more of a care ethic as well, which might come from the eco-feminist side. So it's not just all about logic, it is about providing care as well and caring about animals.
As this chap said, although I think he was obviously criticised by the feminist side of the movement, I suppose.
The ethic of care is I'm starting to understand it a little bit differently, because I always thought of it as just about caring about, but actually I think it incorporates a lot more than that. From when I've spoken to Patrice about that whole thing, that she was saying that care does incorporate elements of justice as well, because you have to care enough about someone to be able to want to fight for justice for them as well. So it's all involved in care, in the ethic of care. It's not just about physically caring about someone. It's still demanding justice and acknowledging their rights.
I think all the arguments need to really mesh together. It depends on the context.
Isn't that close to you've got to love them first, though? It doesn't fall into the animal lover thing. Isn't it a bit close to that? I mean, like, that's where you get the difference, because, if it's about respect, and you don't have to be a lover of other animals to care about them, then do you have to be a carer? You care about them morally, but you don't necessarily, you know what I'm trying to say? Maybe that's where the dispute is between the two groups, maybe.
I think that it doesn't go so much towards love as it goes towards respect and acknowledging our place in the world and the place of other individuals in the world, and all the interconnections that there are between all of us and nature, and instead of seeing things from above as the most rational being with the prevalence of human supremacy, be more calm and take our proper position within nature and in relation to other animals. That's how I understand it.
They talk about it being, like you said, Nella, in relations with others, whether it's other humans, other animals, with the environment and nature. So it's about looking at how do we want to relate, what are the relationships that we want to foster within the world, and that's where the care comes from. But there is the element of respect and justice within that as well.
Right, folks. So we're up to 7:30, so we have to wrap up the next 5 minutes or so, I think.
Brian won't be happy if we don't.
I was just going to say, with the logic, I think it's a way to cut out a lot of arguments, to narrow them down to the areas we want. So if there's a logical claim being made, then there will be a logical answer to that. So then we kind of want to narrow the audience down and push them in the direction we want, which is more about justice. I don't see how we can do it with the logical aspect of it though as well, because if we're making any philosophical claims at all, I think, see, I don't like to get too postmodernist in terms of getting rid of logic altogether, you know.
Yeah, it's a blend. I think logic and emotion create a wise mind, I believe, together. The harmony of those two, perhaps.
Do you notice, team, that Benny has learnt the value of product placement?
Yeah.
I was going to have that up last week, but then I thought it's too pretentious. I'll stuck it up. Yeah.
Right.
Benny, could you please, before we go, could you please tell us again where people can find your book?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so
it's here. It's here. I found it.
You can get it on Amazon and fund the next space trip, or if you don't want to fund Amazon, you can just contact me and I'll send you a PDF in exchange for a small donation to a sanctuary of your choice or whatever you choose. Really, I've done that for a few people. Yeah.
Yeah, like the Vegan Information Project Patreon, maybe. So
perhaps.
Jeremy says, this has been great, very thought-provoking. Thank you, Benny, and everyone else, especially Brian. Thanks, Jeremy. I'll pass that
Brian, on. Yeah, Brian never says a word and always gets the praise. Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't. It's like Clint Eastwood. You don't need to say much to have that.
He has a powerful presence. Yes.
Well, maybe I'm just gonna wave my bum in the camera next week and see what happens.
I'm looking forward to that.
No, you're not. I'm telling you, no, you're not. Right, folks. So on that note, should we say? So thanks for tuning in, everybody. We've still got 17 suffering at the end. Oh yes, I got an advert. I think in about an hour. I kind of had a weird thing because I've got a premiere coming. It's the third part of the recording of the fundraiser that Wendy hosted. So this one is a really good one because it starts off with the vegan songstress giving us a short rendition of a couple of bars from the new song, Stand Up for Animal Rights. Standing up for animal rights. She does it a lot better than I do. Then it goes to Danny Shepherd, the grumpy vegan granddad. He talks about his encounter with a Guardian journalist. Then it goes to Ronnie and Louise, who have done a couple of kind of trips to Ireland, a part of their world tour via Panama, and they visited the Eden Animal Sanctuary, but they also visited Back into Daylight, the one that we talked about. And so there's a film of Back into Daylight from about 8 years ago. And then finally, we have Karen Ridges from Make a Difference Promotions talking about the vegans songstress strategy. So that's coming up at 8:30, I think. I'm hoping it is, otherwise it's starting now, unknowns to me, because it kind of, I put it for 7:30, I think, or 8 o'clock, and it then said starting in 4 hours, and I was thinking that can't be right, and so I'm in a bit of a panic now. It's probably started without me. I don't Anyway, so that's on my channel later tonight. So yeah, so if you can support that would be lovely.
Hang on. I've got a call coming in. Right. Okay, I'll pass it on. Roger, it's Sony. They want to offer you a record deal. For that amazing.
Yes. 3 gold discs. Yeah, that seems all right. Yeah. Yeah. As if it was just that simple, Wendy. If it was just that simple.
I know. If only.
So it's time for us to get our hands out and wave them around.
Royal wave. Is that the royal wave?
Oh yeah, we were doing.
You sound, man.
Yes.
Is it that?
Say goodbye to the peasants.
Hi everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh, we're back.
Oh, I think I've pressed that wrong now. Hang on. Completely
Smooth
wrong.
as ever.
Oh, what am I doing?
Doc, smooth as ever.